Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Travel Tech Insider. I'm Kara Whitehill.
And I'm Gilad Berenstein. We are thrilled to have you back with us for another episode of the Travel Tech Insiders Conversations from the Mailbag. We got way more questions than we could possibly answer in the first Mailbag episode, so we're back again to dig into more of your pressing questions all about our industry. But before we jump in, Kara, how are you doing?
I'm ready for the World Cup. I'm ready for the World Cup. It starts in a couple days, and I'm here for it. I'm here for
Y-
it. How about you?
Similarly, very excited and also enjoying some time at home over summer right now, an opportunity just to think about all the things we have learned and to engage with so many great folks from our industry.
Indeed. And so today we're leaning into some juicy questions for the VC investor point of view, some barriers to personalization, and a really interesting strategic observation about Airbnb's recent moves and what it could mean for a rethink of the company. So let's get started.
Absolutely. Well, our first question today comes from Anna in the UK, and she asked, will VCs finally shift their focus from operations and logistical focused platform to investing in products and entertainment innovations, especially as the new wave of niche OTAs is emerging? Travelers increasingly prioritize creativity, engagement, and emotional connection over efficiency. And it feels like the industry is at an inflection point. So, when will VCs recognize that the real value lies in emotionally driven experiences, not just in optimization of the process? How do you think about that, Kiara?
I think it's a very short answer. And I think VCs will start investing in that when they see proof of life that it will have commercially viable opportunity for them. So they're creatures of financial persuasion. And I think operational products and services are pretty easy to point to the ROI. I think it's a little harder when you're talking about some of these more intangible, revenue driven, aspirational features that a lot of AI certainly has potential for. But I think until you see a strong revenue footprint come out of that and a strong commercially viable footprint, I think VCs are going to be a little reluctant to throw a bunch of money at it. How about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. At the end of the day, I think this question and a lot of other people just ask way too much of VCs. VCs are good at one thing. It's trying to figure out where there's room in the market to scale a solution quickly over a 5 to 7 year window. That's it. VC's job is not to make a better industry. It's not to invest in really wonderful things that would be awesome, but are not going to be able to be scalable in 5 to 7 years. So it's one of those things where, like, there's one thing they're good at, and we should ask VCs to do that one thing they're good at. And the rest of us, innovators, creators, entrepreneurs, should be building all those other things that improve the industry. But at the end of the day, it's a 7 year window and a 7 year question.
Indeed. So our next question is from Alex in London, who asks, is the role of investors to invest in the next big thing, or in this incumbent powerful era, is it the thing that disrupts the next big thing? Gilad, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, this question is a bit similar to the one before, where at the end of the day, if the next big thing after this big thing is going to take 15 years to materialize, then the VC business model just doesn't support it. As I'm sure most of our audience know, when you take money as a VC from LPs, from limited partners who are investing in your fund, there's an investment horizon. There's a time horizon with which you're going to deploy the capital. And there's a time horizon with which you're going to keep the fund open before you close the fund and distribute everything out. So at the end of the day, even if I know for a fact, which is impossible to know, that in 20 years, this thing is going to be the biggest thing ever, that actually isn't the right business model for a VC to invest in. So ultimately, I think the real question is, like, what fits into the window? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it differs a bit from one VC to the next based on what their thesis is about, right? So you have some VCs that are very much focused on what is that next big thing. They're looking for those moonshots, and they're investing in SpaceX when it was still just a crazy idea. And so you do have that constituency of VCs. I will say I think that's less common in travel because I don't think
Yeah.
there's a next big thing per se in our sector. I'll exclude aviation because I do think there's some interesting things in that world that behave very differently, and they do require massive amounts of capital to get traction. But I think when we're talking about this, standard software type plays, you know, a VC is looking to make money. That's what they're doing first and foremost, right? Now you do have some strategic venture capital investors that we all know that are part of our industry too. And they may be looking for something that's a little more specific to a pain point that they're experiencing within their business or their industry sector. And so I think the mission of one VC to the next is going to differ somewhat. But you'll see some that will talk very aspirationally about what that next big thing is. And great. But I think the unspoken part of that question, I think, is if you're a founder or you're a startup building in this space, you don't need to take venture capital. You don't need to aspire to be a venture backed startup. You can just build your thing, right? And build it yourself and keep all the equity and not have to share it with anybody. So you don't have to be the next big thing to have a successful business and a really good idea and legacy to leave for the industry too.
Yeah. And of course, you and I have been saying this to founders for years and years, but it is more true now than ever before. Even just a few years ago, it was still hard to build code. You still had to raise money, and that often included VCs and outside investors and whatever. Well, needless to say, that is not a requirement anymore. So I think everything you said is even more true now than it was a few years ago. Okay. Our next question comes from Ian Michael in Miami, and this is a good one. So Airbnb has 5 million hosts who are identity verified, payment integrated, and already have earned trust from strangers by virtue of being on the platform. And the question is this a lodging travel company with a growth problem since the number has stalled? Or is this the largest pre-onboarded advisor network ever assembled that hasn't been named yet? And if that's true, would naming it and executing it become a way to reimagine the company for a new era? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I thought this was a really fascinating question. We're all familiar with the traditional travel agent, travel advisor model, and there's a place for that for a long time. And then, technology and Expedia and Travelocity and, direct booking and all this other stuff, mobile apps made it a lot easier for the average person to be their own travel agent, right? But I think we're seeing the pendulum swing back again, and we're seeing, this social creator economy of influencers. We're seeing, this interesting place where the LLMs are becoming influencer-ish, but they don't really have a good wrapper on it, I would say, just yet, or commercial model. And then there's companies like Fora that's doing a fantastic job of enabling people to. It's kind of like an Uber, but for being a travel agent, right? You can be your own travel agent and build trips for your friends and family and so on. So when I saw that question, I was like, it reminded me of the earliest days of Airbnb's experiences business, right? And so individual people could just be like, "Hey, you're coming to Cincinnati. I will show you around and,
Yeah.
just, pay me $50 and that's fine." And I think people really liked that early version. I think it got a little bit corrupted because, everything kind of crashed into it and you had a lot of folks that really weren't kind of local experts, I would say, just coming into the space and kind of sullying the mission, which is why I think they set it aside for a while. But between the hosts who I think the hosts that are truly of a local neighborhood and really understand it are probably the best equipped to create a true itinerary experience out of that. And what do you call that? You call that a travel advisor, right? So I saw that question. I thought, that could be really interesting. Thinking of Airbnb not as an accommodations platform, but as a new version of a travel advisor network of some sort. So yeah, I don't know what
Yeah,
you call it though, if it's that or something different.
totally. I totally agree with everything you said based on the question, but I would say I would just disagree with the premise of the question. I don't trust an Airbnb host. Like, yes, I'm going to stay
Mhm.
in their place, and like, yes, like Airbnb does some verification through photos and reviews that makes me feel like, okay, hopefully the lights work and the heat turns on or whatever.
Yeah.
But I simply don't trust them. And it's the same thing with an Uber. Like, and Uber's even more extreme. Like, my life is in this person's hands as they're driving me around the city, but I actually have no trust for that driver. And I feel bad saying this, but often feel like
Mhm.
I'd rather be in a Waymo than I would be in the car with that driver. Sometimes for
Yeah.
nothing to do with them, just wanted to be on a private phone call or something like that with some other person in the car. So it's one of those things where, like, for those Airbnb hosts that have trusts, then it makes perfect sense. They should be do more,
Mhm.
but I don't think you trust them. And frankly, this is why I've been so bearish on Airbnb experiences throughout all three of the iterations of Airbnb experiences, because just because you've got a great apartment in downtown does not mean I care at all about your
Mhm.
favorite bars or restaurants or coffee shops in the neighborhood. So I would lovingly push back against the premise of the question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's sort of like separating the host as a human from the
Yeah,
platform itself. And do you trust the platform or do you trust the host? And what
yeah.
implications does that have? So yeah,
And
very,
and
very
the same
interesting thought.
totally, and the same thing with a hotel, right? Like
Hmm.
in most hotels, I'm not concerned what the person at the front desk thinks is the best restaurant in that city. Whereas, of course, if I was at
Hmm.
an Amman or something like that, then of course I'm very interested in that concierges. But the thing is, like, I trust the Hilton Garden Inn to give me a clean room, a safe room, an orderly room to make sure all the things I need there. But like, I'm not asking them to
Hmm.
complete my experience. I think that analogy is a lot stronger with an Airbnb host than a foray
Yeah.
advisor who you are trusting based on the experience.
Yeah, for sure. Finally, from Sophia in Los Angeles, most travelers say they want personalized recommendations, but they still default to broad review sites and familiar brands. So, what do you think is the biggest barrier preventing personalization from influencing actual traveler decisions? Gilad?
Yeah. I'm feeling a little bit nitpicky today. Maybe I shouldn't be. But the thing is, and the question uses the word personalization as a noun, not as a verb. Personalization is a verb. Personalization is a process that we go through to achieve an outcome we want. So ultimately, like, yes, I love for more opportunity for more companies to be engaged in that process. But the question almost asks, like, why aren't you going to a place that is personalized when really it's about a process? So what we did at UTrip is we actually walked the user through the personalization. We showed them when we brought in the Michelin Guide or Zagat or Google Places or whatever we brought in to build that recommendation. And we got them to say, I trust this source more. I trust that source less. My budget is bigger here, smaller there. And by doing so, we walk them through a process of personalization. So I was just kind of quibble with the point of going to a place. It's really about how does one support the personalization process. And this is ultimately when we use our AI assistants to help us plan a trip, to help us book a trip, whatever. The AI assistant's going to build trust by effectively showing us the options that it's walking through that process to get to something that's personalized for us.
Mhm.
So personalization is a journey. It's not a thing. And you need to take me on that journey, not give me the final thing, because then it's not personalized. It's curated, and curated is great, but that's different from personalization.
Yeah, yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I think I struggle with this concept, and I think we touched on it in our last mailbag too. But I struggle with this so much because I don't think I see this brought up with flights a lot. My flight is not personalized. Seat 17E,
Yeah.
God forbid, or 2D. I mean, those are not personalized. It's a plane seat, right? It's a fare. It's not. That's not personalization. The flight attendant remembering that I love Woodford and bringing that to me
Yeah.
when I first, sit down on the flight, like if that's, kept in my log somewhere, like that's personalization, right? Just recommending me a hotel based on my particular use case or whatever, that's not personalization. But, when I show up, them greeting me by name, and, if I've been a prior guest, they
Yeah.
know like what kind of things that I did when I was there last time, right? That's personalization. So to me, personalization is more about the in real life experience than the technology part of what reviews or what recommendations I'm going to present you. I think that's more of a curated set
Yep.
of things. But to me, personalization is the feeling I get in real life when I'm having this amazing experience with
Yeah.
wherever it is, the hotel, the restaurant, the destination.
Yeah, like you said, personalization is something human, and we have to have a human emotion or experience related to it. Otherwise, it's a great business proposition for a customer to buy. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not the same thing as actual personalization.
Agreed. So now we will turn to the lightning round and I will kick it off. Gilad, what business model or moat shift are we over or underestimating right now?
I will be critical of myself. I think I have overestimated the short term impact of no code. At the end of the day, I just still think that a couple years after I began talking about no code and its impact, that ultimately a lot of people in our industry can't, even more so, don't want to build their own application. So I think we probably in the short term, the long term is hard to predict. But in the short term, I do think that people like me have probably overestimated the impact of no code over the next couple of years. What about you?
Yeah, for me it's a toss up. I think we're still underestimating the power of social and how that's going to, I think, become much more interesting as a channel than what we've been focused on with the chat GPTs and, Claudes and LLMs. And the corollary to that is voice AI. I think we're going to have a rapid shift from, texting and whatnot to voice applications. And I think there's, a lot of folks that are poking around on this today. Um, a lot of folks that are comfortable with it through Alexa and Siri, which aren't, those are kind of like MVP versions, if you'd even consider
Yeah,
them MVPs. But like that behavior already exists, and I think the product just wasn't good enough at that moment in time. But I think it's rapidly catching up, and so I think that's going to be a really interesting shift that we're going to see.
absolutely. Well, that's a good transition to the next question. What are we in a hype cycle in when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I think we're it depends on the place, but there's a part of me that thinks we're in the, what do you call it, the trough of despair.
Yep, yep,
And I think I'm saying that from the perspective of, all the startups and the investing and whatnot that I'm seeing right now, because venture is so far into everything related to AI, or everything they think is related to AI, that it's really difficult for startups that have really interesting
yeah,
solutions that aren't necessarily AI to get any time of day. And so I feel like there's a bit of that, trough of despair stage for a lot of the startups in our industry, and outside of our industry too, that don't fit that, easy AI round peg
yep.
situation. So yeah, I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to take your answer from the last question. Voice. I just think not the value of voice. I think the value of voice is real, but the commercialization, the revenue generating power of voice, I think is just so overhyped that like we've
Mhm.
completely lost the mark.
Yep. Last one. So predictions with the World Cup starting in a couple days. Will this be a boon or a bust for the US travel market? There's been a lot
I
of
am
debate on this right now, and a lot of numbers pointing all different ways, but where do you think we're going to shake out?
I'm very disappointing to say. I think it's going to be a bust. Unfortunately, I think the tickets ended up
Yeah.
being too expensive for most tourists to be able to afford to come to them. And then the other thing I didn't really consider is the host cities are so far apart that it makes it really difficult to be able to see games in more than one city. Whereas when it's a much smaller country, like in a European country, it's just much easier to go
Mhm.
between the cities. So I'm very sad, but I think it'll be a bust from a tourism perspective. But hopefully, we'll have some good games.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's you bring up a really fair point, which is, it's very difficult, I think, if you're coming to the World Cup, for the whole thing,
Yeah.
all these locations are very spread out. So I think it's hard to think about like attending multiple stages of it.
Yep.
So I think you're going to have pockets where it's a boom, and I think pockets where it's a bust,
Yeah.
right? I think we've seen a lot of really strong numbers so far that Canada and Mexico have seen a lot of demand,
Yeah.
and a lot of that's coming at the expense of the U.S. for a variety of reasons that we don't need to get into here. We will get into in one of our upcoming episodes for season 4, but I think some U.S. markets are going to do better than others, but I hope it's a boon for everybody, but we'll see how it goes, and Team USA
Absolutely.
specifically. So that's it for this edition of Conversations from the Mailbag. If you have a burning topic that you'd like us to cover, email us at traveltechinsider@gmail.com or hit us up on LinkedIn.
And we look forward to catching up with you all in real life soon at one of our upcoming events. Make sure to get on the invite list. Sign up on our website at thetraveltechinsider.com. Thank you.